diversity is king, and diversity allows something to thrive, whatever the season throws at you.
Hi, I'm Susie, and you're listening to Soils for Life. In each episode, we bring you the stories of soil, the opportunities in the ground, and the challenges above it. Commercial dairy farming can be intensive and hard on the soil and the land. However, some farmers are proving that dairy systems can be modified to reverse soil and land degradation and improve profitability and resilience at the same time. In this episode, we hear from 4 dairy farmers, changing their farming practices to heal the soil and bring back diversity into the paddock. Kate Mirams is no stranger to change. She's faced plenty of challenges and sees real opportunity in the Australian dairy industry. Farming on floodplain country in Gippsland, she and her husband Peter Neves run around 3,500 cows on 300 acres, alongside their 3 sons and 2 staff.
The Australian dairy industry is full of extraordinary people who are full of inquiry and skill, huge amount of skill, and ability to learn and change their systems. They're people who are constantly monitoring their farm management system and adapting, changing and modifying, moving all the time. We have to be inquiring and we have to be ready to move. I think that the dairy industry is just so well poised because of the attitude and the way we've had to be to get through deregulation and the impacts of changing climate, heat impacts on milk, drought, flood, and I have no concerns for the dairy industry. A lot of the current practices, might seem concerning, but they're just a little spark of aha away from being on the bridge to changing everything.
So Kate, what was your aha moment?
We laser graded some country, which is mechanically levelling the land. So take the topsoil off, level the subsoil to an exact gradient, and then put the topsoil back on. So then we can use irrigation practices that only use gravity. And we did that in the dry summer of 2018-19, and the soil got really pulverised and it blew all over the place. And we also were lucky enough to have an extraordinary laser grading operator, Greg Hare, who's passed away now. And Greg and I spent numerous hours discussing what the water holding capacity of soil was and whether you could impact it by how you manage the soil. And I was pretty sure that the work that he was doing, which we were paying him to do, was doing the opposite to improving the moisture holding capacity. So we started asking around, how do you rapidly repair soil after laser grading? And we had just a beautiful synergy with a lot of other organisations, particularly the West Gippsland Catchment Management Authority and AgVic and private consultants, Jade Kaluran from Healthy Farming Systems. And there's just a groundswell of inquiry about what could we do that might fix this soil quickly. And we were lucky that they were keen to contribute time and energy to the project. And we set up a paired bay trial with 3 replicates. And one bay we just called Regen, and we had the freedom to do whatever we thought might fix soil on the Regen bays. And right next to it, each bay, we had what was pretty conventional, normal practice for our district at the time. So we started just planting as many different varieties as would come in a mix, just really trying to get a handle on how to grow a heap of feed, for one, and do the magic in the soil. And I think one of the things we learned was we knew that we had to let those plants fully express themselves, so their roots would grow out to the full architecture in the soil, and they had the full opportunity to create the symbiotic relationships with whatever they wanted to relate to in the soil. So we saw the surface of the soil look like it had boiled over with worm castings, and it was aerated and light, and just really quite extraordinary difference between that and the monocultures. And we've had a huge amount of fun with it, and we've learned absolutely masses.
So, with that trial you're running, what did you discover was the difference between the regen bays and the ryegrass bays?
In terms of what I've learned, we've had soil moisture meters in under the regen bays and under the conventional bays. And we're seeing the regen bays, the roots are drawing moisture, which makes me know they're growing as a result, to 60 centimetres on the regen bays and to only 30 centimetres on the ryegrass clover bays. And then when we sum the amount of water that's drawn out of the soil between irrigations or rainfall events, it's about 48 millimetres on the conventional soils and it's 100 millimetres on the regen bays. And that is the question I started with, was could these soils hold more water?
So, those moisture probes are suggesting that the plants in the regen bays are able to send their roots down deeper and access more water than the plants in the conventional bays. That's pretty encouraging. What else have you learned from these trials?
By 2021, we learned enough to have the confidence to take the regen system across our whole farm and be really open to listening and watching and observing and not having a hard line in the sand. Our farm has been benchmarked in the Victorian Dairy Farm Monitor Project for 21 years, and the discussion group we belong to, I was able to compare our farm to how the group was going, and that was really important to me because we had changed so much, and I was really curious to know, are we still harvesting as much pasture? And when we say pasture harvesting, we talk about what's been grazed and gone straight through a cow and plus what's been cut as silage. And that's a big indicator of how well I'm using the land I've got. So we try and hit the target of around 12 tonnes of dry matter per hectare per year. So in the first year, we actually dropped our pasture consumption down to 9.7 tonnes. But we had gone from 225 kilos of nitrogen applied as granular urea per hectare, and we dropped that down to 113. And so we realised we've moved too fast. We haven't got the biological activity in our system to support that. So then we went back up to 142 kilos of nitrogen per hectare, and then we started to use the foliar, but a huge amount of other stuff. So in the next year, we were able to drop that to 76 kilos. The following year, we were able to drop it to 29. And in our very last year of data that we've got, 23-24, we dropped it to 20 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. So that's been like quite a journey to learn. If we can keep our pasture consumption at around that 12 tonnes and we can move to less and less nitrogen, then the nitrogen's coming from somewhere else. We're getting a gift of nitrogen, either from the legume fixation or from free living nitrogen bacteria. So yeah, when we discover those figures, we're really excited. And then we thought we need to dig deeper and see, did it cost us a heap more and how are we comparing to other farms? The average across our discussion group is somewhere between 27 and say 48 kilos of feed grown per kilo of nitrogen applied. And for our farm, it was between 9 and 16 times more than that. So it was sitting at 427 kilos of feed grown per kilo of nitrogen applied. So again, that's just really showing us how much nature stepped up to provide that nitrogen for us for free. And it's really proof that even though the journey takes years to get there, when you get there, that is a massive saving to not spend all that money on nitrogen fertiliser. We've spent that money on a whole heap of other things. So overall, we've kept our fertiliser budget fairly similar, but we've moved to a more particularly fungal friendly and microbe friendly. And over that time, we've grown our herd from 240 cows to 320 cows. And we've grown our milk solids from about 140,000 to 155,000 kilos of milk solids. All those indicators are showing that this work we're doing is moving in the right direction.
There seems to be just so many great benefits to multi-species pastures, but it's interesting that in a survey done by Dairy Australia in 2019, they found that only 5% of farmers had sown a multi-species pasture. Do you think that's starting to change?
I have absolutely no doubt that as they start to see the power of two species, say a grass and a legume, say this winter we go out and sow oats normally, but this year we'll sow oats and peas. The peas will give a huge amount of free nitrogen to that oat crop, and the peas will be invited to fix so much more nitrogen because the oats right next to it is soaking it up and taking it away from that soil environment, really encouraging the fixation. And when we see that 1+1 is 3 for cropping, we start to ask where else are the synergies in our business that we can harvest.
Anna Thomson is a pasture and grazing scientist with a background in ruminant nutrition. She's discovered that multi-species pastures provide answers to a wide range of challenges. And I asked her what makes them so effective.
Some of the things that we're trying to look at, like the level of production that can be achieved but with less inputs. So we're really interested in multi-species because of the legumes in the mixture. They are going to be able to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, which is going to reduce reliance on those kind of expensive and really fluctuating inputs. And on top of that, we hope that multi-species is going to bring other benefits, like potentially high levels of growth, nutritious forage, potentially with high mineral content, also animal health benefits. We're also looking at things like, can we extend the growth season into the drier, hotter periods where traditionally perennial ryegrass is going to stop growing nutritious forage, which would obviously be hugely beneficial because that's when feed is just the most important thing to farmers, and having that fresh green feed on offer at a time when everything else is suffering from moisture stress and not nutritious is so crucial. So we've now just at the end of the second year of data collection. And I'm really happy to say that we did see really high levels of production in those 2 years from our multi-species mixtures, including trying to match mixtures to different levels of fertiliser. And all of those mixtures have done really well. And in pretty much every case here in Gippsland, where we're based, those mixtures exceeded the yield of perennial ryegrass. So that's such an exciting finding because it's actually proving that farmers can grow more with less and they can move away from reliance on nitrogen fertiliser. We did also see that the multi-species grow longer into the dry seasons as well. What we actually saw from our platform this spring is that we were able to get equal yields from our multi-species mixtures. It shows that farmers could switch to multi-species without any deficit in production. So particularly deep-rooting herbs, we see really sustaining the pastures for longer into those hotter, drier months of the summer, which is exactly what we were hoping to see. We especially see things like chicory and like burnet and yarrow. Just having some coping strategies for farmers when drought periods come along is going to be so important. And this could be one piece of that puzzle.
You also had some interesting results around temperature in multi-species paddocks. Can you tell me about those results?
We have some soil moisture sensors in the ground under some of our plots. The cool finding was that we actually found the soil temperature under the multi-species swards in summer was a whole degree cooler on average than the perennial ryegrass. That's including both day and night temperatures. A whole degree is quite a lot when you consider that night you wouldn't expect to be that different.
Methane is a big issue in the dairy industry. What's your trial showing about the impact of multi-species for methane emissions?
One thing I'm excited about is that we recently did win some funding to extend our work into sheep production as well. That project is going to have a big focus on using multi-species as a potential pathway to reduce the amount of methane grazing livestock are emitting. For me, that's another big part of the picture of sustainability. If you look at your methane emission reports, a lot of people find that about 70% of the whole farm emissions from dairy are actually methane. We have some early results from a PhD student who's working with me to suggest that certain plants inside the multi-species mixture can make it likely that the overall multi-species mixture will then enable about 10% methane reduction from the grazing animals. So, it's quite difficult to be a dairy farmer at the moment. Climate change, policy, consumer sentiment, and the financial aspects, of course, like all kind of combine to make it quite a difficult job to do. So I hope that research like this help by showing there are ways we can cope with problems like climate change and financial stress by lowering input costs and things like that.
Absolutely. And how does a farmer go about designing their multi-species seed mixture? Because it's not about just throwing different seeds together. It involves understanding soil types, climate, livestock needs, and long-term goals. I guess it could be really overwhelming. What are the key steps in creating a tailored mix?
A lot of our thinking in the Resilient Foragers project is about how you design your seed mixture. I think that to really make a success of multi-species, you need to be fitting the right species to your environment and your use case. And I also think that there's room to really think about the roles of different functional groups within the mixture and why they're there, what they're doing, and how they're all working in harmony. I always say they're all multi-species, so there's room for all of it, and it just really depends what fits a farmer's particular system. And then you can get down into like what functional groups you want. And, what is each of those doing? Like the legumes, they're fixing the nitrogen, the herbs, they're deep rooting, the grasses, they're still needed for their nutritional composition and the spring growth. So you've just got to think about how all of those things are going to work together. If you're just getting into this for the first time, you might just want to combine 5 or 6 species together initially and see how that goes. And I'd advise just taking a part of your farm that maybe historically doesn't do that well under your monoculture, because there you've kind of got nothing to lose. You could try a mixture. It may not be a success the first time if you haven't fully optimized it for your system. And there's still going to be a learning process to go through, see what does well in your soil types and your conditions. And hopefully research like ours is going to give people some principles that they can go away and work with and then adapt into their own systems.
Simon Schulz, a third-generation farmer from Taboon in Victoria, has embraced many levels of diversity. Within his business, he does manufacturing, distribution, he has his own organic brand of cheese and milk, and even a cafe on his farm. But he also saw the opportunity to bring diversity into the paddock. So he jumped right in when he heard about the benefits of multi-species pastures.
The challenge is where to start. Because there's not a lot of farmers out there doing it, it's a fairly new process in our region. There's a handful of farmers in our area doing it, and they're very open to giving advice. But as a farmer, the biggest challenge is knowing what questions to ask and ask how to start and what considerations you need to do, because there's consequences in any action we take, and consequences can be environmental, they can be economical, they can be social, they can be a whole range of things. And the biggest challenge has been the change of mindset from a traditional ryegrass mentality of doing a lot of silage this time of year to, okay, now we're shifting our growing patterns.
So how did you shift your focus?
The way I had shifted my focus was to see where my grandfather and father had been, maintaining organic status and not destroying the microbiome in the soil. However, primarily focused on ryegrass and clover, and just really those 2 species and not much variation other than that. And in the research I had from engagement with consumers, I was seeing more and more interest and demand for being more than just organic, to really showcase how we live on the land, how us as farmers are stewards of the land, improving that land. And that's where my interest sparked up. Did a lot of research, found a lot of great interest in Nicole Masters' work in terms of the soil biology and the soil science, and then a whole range of other farmers who had done multi-species and regenerative agriculture. And that led me down a path of looking at a whole range of different species, creating a salad bowl mix of pastures for the cows rather than just ryegrass, having green cover majority of the year rather than traditional rye's peak growing seasons in spring, to more of a year-round growth, year-round capture of sunlight, and then therefore the year-round supply of green feed for my ever-growing demands for milk.
How much of the farm have you transitioned to multi-species pastures?
We tackled about a third of our farm in the last few years with multi-species. We've done 3 seasons now, sowing every 6 months. When we get the first rains in the autumn break, those paddocks are responding immediately to the moisture. They're weeks ahead of the paddocks that have not been touched. And likewise, through the winter patches and winter periods when traditionally the paddocks get pugged up, but with heavy cattle on wet soils, we're not seeing anywhere near the damage on those soils. And then come through the spring as well, we're seeing that those paddocks, without synthetic fertilisers, growing much faster than the paddocks next to it. But there's also in the tillage formation that we're doing, we're not tilling the whole paddock. We're only tilling around 17% of the paddock. Imagine a 50 mil row every 500 mil. So that's quite narrow. That's aeration of the soil as well. Those two actions, I think, with the multi-species and with the tillage method, has really seen significant gains on the pastures that we've done. And, we're going to start seeing turnips, oats, triticale, barley, wheat, plantain and chicory. Different category of species come up and then provide the animals with nice, fresh green leaf to get them through a potentially dry summer. So far, with 30% of the farm under this multi-species, the signs are there that it's definitely going to be a positive for the biodiversity of our farm. We're seeing a lot of improvement in biodiversity just on the different species that we carry. The mix we're putting in is 19 different species, twice a year, some are perennial, some are annual. So we are seeing an improvement in the soil structure in those particular paddocks, and it seems to be improving every season that we do. Being organic for such a long time, we've got a high organic carbon levels, incredibly high. We've balanced also in pH, which we traditionally have fairly acidic soils in the area, and I think that's largely to do with the fact that we don't use synthetic fertilisers or herbicides. The next stage for us will be to try and baseline a little bit of what we're doing, comparing a couple of years of the multi-species versus some paddocks that we haven't touched, and just seeing the improvement in those. But we're getting that anecdotally through visual observations and visual soil assessments, just the improvement on the soil structure and just the amount of dry matter that we're removing from that through the cows.
That's really encouraging. And how are your cows responding to your shift to multi-species?
It's a little challenging because the whole farm's not multi-species. The cows will be on a multi-species and the next day they may not be. We are seeing that they milk very well off a multi-species pasture, and we're seeing, since I've moved to multi-species, the animal health has improved. From the evidence, again, of other farmers, they suggest that the inputs, even in minerals and additives that people will use on cattle, that those costs will diminish because the animals are getting the mineral variety and the nutrition variety within the pasture rather than bringing in and adding in. The big champion for that is the multi-species pasture. I want to do the multi-species to try and encourage the deeper rooting species to try and access and unlock more nutrients naturally in the soil, so I don't have to focus so much on buying in inputs of compost and additives there.
As well as multi-species pastures, you're bringing diversity to the farm in a whole range of other ways, right?
We've got a whole range of different biodiversity activities here in agroforestry as well. We've been planting biodiversity tree plantations for harvesting in the future and also for environmental corridors. We've now got beehives here on the farm as well, and we are working towards having our own beef brand or meat brand alongside our dairy offerings. That ability on a dairy farm to stack enterprises and have that vertical or horizontal integration is one way in which we see our environmentally sustainable codependency on each of those different areas. The trees help the cows, helps the pasture, the bees helps pollination. Chickens, that will help fertilise parts of the farm and help with weed burden, pest burden and so forth. So we're very open to further developing our operation to have sort of stacked enterprises on the same land. What excites me about the farm is not so much the cows, it's not so much the cheese and the milk we're producing, it's the growing of the biodiversity on the farm, growing of these multi-species pastures, seeing how it interacts with the soil and so forth, and trying to prove the naysayers wrong when they say you can't do that or you need to put nitrogen on it, and she'll be right, mate. And I was like, we can do it better. I enjoy being told, no, you can't do that, because it usually spurs me on to prove people wrong.
For years now, low milk prices have been a major concern, with dairy farm numbers dropping by 77% in Australia since 1980. The pressure has been immense. Chris Eggert, a third-generation farmer, along with his wife Anne, run Ox Hill Organics just outside Wauchope on the mid-north coast of New South Wales. Chris made the bold decision to shift towards organic farming to achieve a higher milk price. And he also diversified his income by introducing chickens and pigs onto the farm. I asked him what it's been like to navigate all these changes.
The reason we went organic because we could see we're going to go broke doing it the other way, and we had nothing to lose at the time. And we went organic because we thought there was an opportunity, like an economic opportunity. I didn't go organic because I thought I was going to make the farm better, have healthy soils or anything like that. All that came after, as I learnt and realised what it was really all about. It's just lucky we made that decision 25 years ago to change. And as we've gone along, how important it is and how successful it can be.
So, Chris, you made the switch to organic farming for financial reasons, but then you found out a whole lot of other reasons to make the switch.
I went to uni when I finished school and did rural science, and it was based towards chemical use and how the chemicals worked and fertiliser use, single super, phosphate use and all the high production. And my first 3 or 4 years at home on the farm, I was pretty driven by all those sorts of things, yeah. So I'd be growing corn using pre-emergence and post-emergent sprays. And I saw a caterpillar or bug in the pasture, I'd be spraying it with pesticide and all that sort of thing. I didn't think there was anything wrong with it. I thought I was doing a really good job. I still remember using the chemicals and all that sort of stuff to grow corn and how sick they made me. And that's why so many all these health problems and that. We've got all this access to supermarkets and foods and that sort of thing. Even what we think's healthy food is probably not worth eating, especially if we got chemical and that, pesticides, insecticides and all that sort of stuff on it as well.
So you're not alone in being concerned about the level of pesticides and insecticides, with 65% of Australian households purchasing something organic in the last year, and half of those purchases were dairy. But on the other side, less than 1% of total dairy production in Australia is organic. So the consumer is really interested in buying organics, but how is organic dairy farming seen within the farming community?
Yeah, and we went through all that. Oh, you'll go broke. If you can't use phosphorus and you can't use nitrogen, you'll go broke. And all the world's going to run out of phosphorus and all this sort of stuff. You hear that all the time. We think we need to put more and more on all the time to grow stuff. That's because everything's just got so out of balance and the soils are so dead. There's no life in them. So we're basically force feeding them, putting a drip in your arm, you know what I mean? I think if you're a farmer and you're thinking about changing, you just have to have a bit of an open mind, and I can safely say it can be done without all the chemicals. At the end of the day, it's all about what we're going to stick in our mouths, what we're eating, and the quality of that food is. You make a good product from nature and the biology's working in your soil, and that to me is so cool. It's awesome. Makes you pretty happy, I reckon. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not something you learned in a classroom. For you, moving to multi-species was more a process of observation and experimentation and getting out there and getting your hands dirty.
Early on in our organic venture, which was 25 years ago, we still grew corn for silage, so row crop corn, but I was putting lab and soybeans and cowpeas with the corn. And it's getting really good results. But I was still thinking at that stage, I suppose, with a conventional mindset that you needed to have lots of nitrogen to grow a crop. But I was organic, so we'd put chicken litter in on compost and then we'd grow the corn. But I was thinking, if I just put some cowpeas and lab, they'll grow up the stem and I'll still be able to harvest it with the same machine. And it worked really well. But what I noticed was afterwards, when we planted our winter pastures, traditional rye and clover and maybe chicory and plantain too, they did really well. Something's going on here where with the other plants, they're improving the soil. From then on, I've always thought that plants grow plants. If you hit a bit of a hot period and the little shoots coming up, say a little cowpea or little sunflowers coming up, it's got a little canopy above it to protect it. Do you know what I mean? Or you get a heavy storm or something like that, you've got some ground cover for it. And those other plants might start senescing soon and losing leaf and just go to seed, which is not going to take too much sunlight away from those plants coming up underneath. And they'll get up above them then, and they'll basically eat them like a big green monster. They're providing food for each other. Like you use the summer crops to grow the winter crops and the winter crops to grow the summer crops.
That's such a beautiful concept that plants grow plants. Chris, you've been seeing good results with summer multi-species crops too.
With the multi-species in summer, you can add tons and tons of organic matter to your pastures really fast. With us, we have February and March, normally like good rainfall months. Traditionally, like in March, like when we're conventional, we'd be spraying paddocks out with Roundup, like killing summer grasses, so we can plant winter grasses. And the winter grasses don't really get going till September and October anyway. It seems crazy that's your best growing season, and we're killing the grasses. I'm not afraid to plant multi-species summer crop in February, which is pretty late, but you still got those March, April, May growing months. And it helps shorten your feed gaps. Growing multi-species crops into Kaikui, Paspalum, Soteria, Rhodes grass late in the summer. Like I know that some of it's not going to come up, but all those grains and that are going to act as like life in the soil, because all the grains have got microbes in them too. So you're adding life to your soil all the time, and that's the key. And I've just planted the last few days early summer crops into paddocks where we've cut ryegrass and clover and oats for silage, and it's coming back like nice and green, and it's probably, a couple inches high. But you look down and the roots are really like pumping, like they're really white. There's more fungi and bacteria and that in the soil, breaking the roots down off those plants. And when those plants die, they're broken down. And it's different microbes living on the roots of different plants. Not all the same microbes live on Kaikui as they do on cowpeas. So it's different. They're also chewing on the soil, making minerals available. They're chewing on the organic matter and all the detritus and the rock in the soil, the minerals in the soil. They turn that into an element, calcium, magnesium, potassium, boron, zinc, that the plant can take up. So the more diversity you have, the more chance you've got to take up different nutrients. And every amino acid's got a different biochemical matrix. And the combination of the amino acids makes proteins. If we can't have all the things available in the soil, all the different types of elements, because they're locked up or whatnot, or there's only a small pool of microbes in the soil, if those plants don't have that opportunity to take up, say, magnesium or manganese or zinc, then we can't form proper proteins. If we can't form proper proteins, it's going to be pretty hard to form proper vitamins and hormones within our cells. Multi-species crops definitely does that.
One of the major concerns about the dairy industry is that manure and nutrient runoff from synthetic fertilizers can affect soil health and pollute waterways if they're not managed properly. But Chris, you're not using those synthetic fertilizers, but not only that, you actually found an opportunity with those waste products.
With the dairy, instead of like you see on all dairy farms, they hose off into effluent pits and systems, like they use lots of water to hose the pee in the pool away and all that. And they have dams and suckers and pumpers and swirlers and all that sort of stuff. We put grass on the cow yards, like dry hay, weeds. They pee and poo on that, like so it's a bedding. And that absorbs like all the nitrogen, and then it gets wet and push it out, compost it and put it on the paddocks. Often we'll put seed in the compost, especially when broadcasting seed. So all the microbes in the compost are touching the seed, so they're going out with all the food. And we might put some rock dust, like just basic basalt dust. If you've got lots of microbes, they're chewing on that stuff, making nutrients available. They're in there like silicon, magnesium, calcium and potassium. I just see a good result from it. But you can see that rock dust a couple of inches under the soil. I didn't put it there, I put it on top, like the worms. They're coming up, chewing it, taking it down, or some sort of other insect, I don't know. The soil's been moved by the biology, and so I think the compost makes the worms come up and get it. Come up, take it back under, and that's where you get carbon stored deep in your soil for a rainy day or a dry day, because it just holds on better to nutrients and water and all that sort of thing. Like you don't have to be a scientist and all that sort of stuff or do a heap of research. You can see it. It just makes sense.
Sandra Jefford is a dairy farmer from Clydebank in Sale, Victoria. She's seen nature thrive with the introduction of multi-species on her farm. They milk around 350 cows year-round, and the home farm spans around 950 acres, some of which are wetlands. Sandra is bringing diversity into the farm in many ways, from sowing perennial multi-species pastures to planting trees.
We're planting a lot of trees, primarily to give the cattle shade and shelter, because once the temperature's over about 25 degrees, cow's milk production declines. With climate change, more likely to get hot spells, we thought, well, we're not going to build shade houses, we're going to plant trees. Last winter we planted 11,000 trees. They're mainly forestry type trees, so that in the long run they will be harvested. But next to each of those 11 shelter belts, there's also 1 or 2 rows of permanent mixed native trees and shrubs. And I'm trying to get the fences located in such a way that the cows will be able to snack on those plants once they're big enough. Some wattles and eucalypts are naturally anti-worming. And being organic, we can't use chemicals to control things like worms and liver fluke. So the cattle can snack on those and self-medicate. Having these trees gives more diversification. In one shelter belt, we already have 8 beehives, and the bees are doing fantastically well because they're working on our pastures full of flowering plants like lucerne, dandelions, chicory, clovers. And then they've got the trees in the shelter belts like lots of different wattles, tree lucerne, and leptospermum. So they've got huge variety.
You've also done a lot to introduce multi-species pastures into your paddocks. What has your approach been?
The majority of our land is multi-species plants. We choose to feed our cattle as much variety as we can. And I also consider plants in the pasture that come naturally, and some people might regard as a weed. But things like dandelions and marshmallow are really nutritious. And so I include those in the mix. They're not weeds. Cattle are very happy to eat them. So the doctors tell us that we should be eating at least 30 plant foods per week. Centuries ago, people probably ate more than 100 plant foods a week. So I think, well, a big dairy cow, ryegrass and white clover is not good enough. We've been planting multi-species permanent pasture for about 15 years. We look for as many plant families in the mix as we can. So we've got the clovers, which are the legumes, we've got the grasses, then we've got the chicory and the plantain. So that gives us 4 families. And then things like the marshmallow occurs naturally. That's another plant family. We have bits of purslane. So that's easily 6 families. The mix sort of shifts itself around depending on climatic conditions. We occasionally do annual multi-species mixes, and it's easy to get more plant families into those mixes. So you've got things like cereals, legumes, brassicas, and then we can add things like sunflower, buckwheat, and you get the most beautiful bulk, and it's really pretty. So we'll also add things like tillage radish, and that's really good for opening up the soil, getting the air in. And once that tillage radish rots, you're left with a big sort of funnel in the ground, and that gets the air in. And then when you go and look there, you'll often find it's full of organic matter that has broken down, and that's just ideal for the worms. I'll occasionally buy a pre-made mix, but often I'll buy the individual bags, and it's just like making cake. You make your recipe, mix your seeds, put stimulants and microbes on the seeds just prior to planting to try and get the seeds established quickly. Having cows going into a good multi-species pasture, grazing it, and then taking them out and locking that paddock up for a number of weeks, the plants get the chance to regrow their roots, regrow on top of the ground, to photosynthesize and put more carbon in the soil. And that is really good for the planet.
What results are you seeing in the paddock as a result of all these changes?
I've started doing sap analysis, which gives us different information like the pH in the sap of the plant, which I'd never tested before, and getting the bricks on every sample, knowing the sugar levels in the plants, and then talking to other farmers. And we've got a long way to go. There's a lot of potential for improvement, getting the bricks as high as we can, because I have seen that for every 1 degree increase you get in bricks, cows will produce an extra 100 grams of milk. So if we could lift our bricks by 10, which I think that's at the top of the scale, we could potentially get our cows producing another litre of milk per day across the lactation for no extra cost or effort. That'd be a big win for us.
It's fascinating to see the connection, how bricks levels directly relate to increased milk production. What are you planning to experiment with to get your bricks levels even higher?
I've only recently become aware another organic dairy farmer has bricks levels at 18. In the past, ours were really low. We didn't get anything above 5. So now we're up to 8. We've got a long way to go, but it's good to know that we've got potential. So a few things that we'll try: extend the period between grazings, letting plants get bigger, and brewing more microbes on farm so that we can get more diversity and just more microbes in the soil. If I hadn't started on this SAP analysis, I would never have known that there was another organic farmer with bricks at 18. The majority of farmers, I think, don't test and don't know. So it'll be interesting to start talking to other farmers and see if they are testing and what are their levels at.
It would be great to have a platform where farmers could share their bricks levels and have a chat. Kate Mirams is one of the farmers who has managed to get her bricks to 18. Kate, can you just explain a little bit about it for us?
Yeah, so a bricks meter measures the concentrations of sugar, and you just squeeze a bit of sap from the plants that are growing there onto the lens and look through it towards the sunlight, and it'll give you a reading of the concentration of sugars. And when we started, we were around the 3, and we've got paddocks that have got as high as 18, but we're sort of probably hoping that we're sitting somewhere around 12 on average. And, there's other challenges around how do we grow our feed so it's high bricks, low nitrate. And we can't do that with a lot of nitrogen. But a high bricks, low nitrate feed is exactly what rumens want. So that concentration of sugars in the feed going up means when it gets to the rumen, there's plenty of sugar there for the microbes to be using excess nitrogen. But at the same time, what we're seeing is on the conventionally grown urea paddocks, there's 5 times more nitrates than on the regen bays. And nitrates are a problem in the rumen. You actually need a lot of sugar. And some people actually feed raw sugar, but they also feed high starch things like a lot of grain or maize grain particularly to mop up that nitrate and to manage homeostasis in the rumen. Yeah, so the way that we're trying to produce the food is not just high energy and, low fiber, but to be careful about, I guess when we test feed, we test for protein and we call it crude protein, and it really is just a measure of the amount of nitrogen. And we haven't worried if it was 28 or whatever, even though the cow only needs sort of, say, 24. But that difference might all be nitrates, not real protein. It might not yet be built into amino acids and be available as building blocks for the cow to use for milk or growth. So by providing a pasture that's 24% crude protein instead of 28, but has high bricks and low nitrates, it's actually a better feed for cows to eat anyway. And yeah, I'm still learning how to do that well.
Anna, what advice would you give to a farmer who's eager to get started with multi-species and diversify their practices on their farm?
Firstly, for someone who's not gone down this road yet, pick that paddock that you don't really know what to do with this year and start talking to your agronomist about what's a simple mixture of species you could put in there. And remember to think about legumes and to drop your nitrogen fertilizer rate accordingly. I guess the second invitation would be that we show a lot of groups of farmers around our Ellenbank-based research centre in Gippsland. We would love to have as many people come through the doors as possible.
With more farmers bringing diversity back onto their farm with their multi-species pastures, it seems that the industry as a whole is starting to take notice.
It's been really exciting to just be home from the Grounds for Growth conference, which is Dairy Australia's first attempt at running an event to talk about soil and plant diversity, multi-species crops, and they showcased a broad range of dairy farming systems, and there were some amazing farmers showcased there. It's all sorts of potential to realise that dairying doesn't just look one way. It looks a whole lot of different ways in different climates, in different places, and for different purposes. Farmers have felt under a great deal of pressure to grow a lot of food to feed the world. And then it turns out was already producing too much and there's a huge amount of waste. And the food that we're growing isn't as nutrient dense as it could be. So maybe if we took the pressure off ourselves to grow so much quantity and started to really explore how do we grow that food so it's full of nutrients, phenols, elements, and joy. I've got 3 sons who are early 20s down to nearly 18. And if you were a young person right now watching the international news and watching the geopolitical situation unfold, you've got to have questions. And none of us actually can face our children and say what the future is. But we can confront our young people and say, I'm going to get out and do the very best I can with the days I've got to ensure that your future's the best it can be. That's all I can do. And, it's an act of defiance to be joyous and get on with the right things.
Looking to the future, Simon Schulz is also focused on the next generation.
My job now is to build better foundations for that next generation or the generation after that. And that's through economic sustainability, that's through environmental sustainability, that's through the multi-species, different enterprises on the farm, that's through the community, making sure that we're an active participant in the local community through educating other farmers, involving the local food community, and then supporting other brands as well. In our local region, there's a whole range of small producers, but wineries, distilleries, ice cream factory, there's a berry farm. We can give a lot to that community as well and grow this area and food production that's not just focused on us. We've got over 60 families directly employed on the farm on 1,000 acres, and there's so much more we could do to add value to bring more people on our journey. The hope is that the more successful we are, then hopefully we can encourage other farmers to consider both organic, not using synthetic fertilisers, and then also multi-species as well.
This podcast has been produced by the Grow Love Project in collaboration with Soils for Life. We'd like to thank all the guests for their time and insights. For more information, check out the links in the show notes, sign up to the Soils for Life newsletter, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. Thanks for listening.